Cheyenne, Yue, Inerka, and me, Luisa Feliciano. We're going to this talk about literature review. A little bit about myself. I've been working on UPRM's library in what's basically a graduate writing center. So what I've been doing for the past 6 years is helping Latin American students basically polish or enhance their skills in communication, particularly in the English language. So moving forward, it is important to review relevant literature, even if you're starting out, if you're an undergrad, if you're a master's student, PhD, or a postdoc, because we're always working on proposals, theses, dissertations. If you're an undergrad and you're working on a scholarship application, for instance, you might need to work on what they call a letter of proposed research. So you might need to do a literature review too. So today we're going to discuss the objectives and guidelines for preparing a literature review. And as a matter of outline, we're going to define what a lit review is, some objectives, guidelines. We're going to talk a bit about citations and transitions because it's important for crafting a good review. We have an example, and if we're good on time, we're going to do the example. If not, it's going to be on the Canvas course. We can go through it later on. And we're going to take some questions. So why do we need to write literature reviews, right? So you have to think that your goal as a researcher is to determine what is the current state of knowledge in your particular area. And you do that by asking yourself two questions. So what is known and what is not known about a particular subject? Why? Because this unknown is what's gonna help you contribute to science in your field. So, and that's the problem with many students. So they just think that, so I just read some articles and I make a summary and then I'm done. Well, no, because a literature review is not just a summary. So students usually take articles and then just make one independent paragraph for each reference and they just put it together. And that's not what a literature review is about. So if you only do this, if you only make an account of who did what, when they did it, but you fail to comment on these articles' relevance or quality, then you're not doing a literature review, you're just doing an annotated bibliography. And about bibliography, it's good when you're starting out, but the literature review entails more than that. So a literature review is really a synthesis. And what is a synthesis? It's a combination of ideas, right? We combine ideas to make a theory of these different articles and sources. It's important that they're published by accredited scientists. And what we mean with that is that you should try to have your articles be from high impact factor journals or that they have a lot of citations or the main author has a lot of citations because that tells you that they're accredited and their research is relevant. Usually literature review is organized into subtopics. If you're writing a review for a technical report or maybe like we talk about the letter of proposed research for scholarship, it might not need subtopics, but if it's for a longer document, like thesis or dissertation, then you're gonna need to organize them into subtopics. So what are the objectives of a lit review? You have to show that you have a thorough understanding of your research topic and you're an expert in your field. You need to provide a coherent account of what has been done, what is currently being addressed, and what needs to be addressed in the future for your relevant area of study or your relevant work. You must also provide accounts on the available techniques, materials, instrumentation it's being used. You should be able to show if there are any correlations, contradictions, any ambiguities, or knowledge gaps. It can be on research, on techniques, or methods. You can even have conflicts between competing research groups. So for example, if you're testing a drug and you have a publication of the pharmaceutical industry, then they might publish that the drug is safe and it's been tested and it's safe. But you can have other groups saying that no, it needs to be studied further. So you need to be able to find these conflicts and then discuss them and talk about them, if that's the case in your research. You must impose your view on the issue by providing analysis or commentary so you can demonstrate that you understand what's going on. And this does not mean your personal opinion. And it's important. It's not that I don't agree because I don't like this research group, or I don't like this company, or whatever. So it's your view on what's being discussed based on the evidence, based on the results, based on data, not just your personal opinion. And most importantly is to advance knowledge and scientific discovery. If you're writing a thesis or dissertation, you also need to demonstrate that what you're doing is going to contribute. It's going to be an original contribution to science. So there are 8 steps to develop a good literature review. The first one, and it might seem a bit obvious, is to consult your library about searching techniques. So you should know which are the keywords in your area of study. So it's going to be easier for you to find the information that you need. In UPRM, we have seminars on how searching techniques. So we help students find those keywords and use databases and find the information that they need to craft their literature review. Step 2, you should use bibliographic data management software. And there's a lot of them available. I personally use Mendeley. So if you have any questions about Mendeley, or if you would like to have, resources to help you with Mendeley, then I can certainly do that. You should learn how to use it, because if you're writing a course project or a small report, you might only have 10 sources, but if you're writing a thesis or dissertation and you have 100 or 200 citations, then this is going to really help you out. Step 3, you need to look for what they call tertiary, secondary, and primary sources. We're going to discuss them a bit later. There's also something called fringe papers. They're papers that they're not worthy of primary source status, but they might have useful information. So you should not dismiss them, just keep them on a pile so you can come back to them later on. It's important to learn how to use Google Scholar. So you can take the keywords from step 1 and then use it to find the information that you need. We have a handout, a resource on the Canvas course, which is choosing appropriate articles for research or for research. So sometimes we have articles and we don't know how to approach them. So this checklist will help you figure out what you should do to approach like a paper, and how do you get useful information out of it. So I encourage you to check it out. Moving on to the sources. So the tertiary sources are usually a good place to start looking up information, general overview of your research area. They're usually textbooks, encyclopedias, or handbooks. We have secondary sources, right? Which are summaries or syntheses of primary sources. They're usually broader in content, and they're less current than primary sources, which we're going to see next. They're usually called lit review articles or research reviews. The primary sources, on the other hand, are original papers or articles published. They show new scientific discoveries, and they're usually the result of research and that's conducted either in the lab or in the field. So you do your research, you produce data, and then you publish. So these are going to be primary sources. Examples are the original articles published in journals, could be thesis, dissertations, or technical reports that are usually produced by government agencies or federal agencies. For example, right, this is a general view of what energy storage, if we're talking about renewable energy, then we know that storing the energy is a big deal. So we can have, like, for this example, this book that's called Energy Storage in Power Systems. So if we go to this book, we are going to find a secondary source, which is a research review on energy storage technology. So this type of article, it's a secondary source, it provides an overview of different primary sources that have been published. So when you find one of these articles, they're super useful to give you current information on what's being done in your area. And usually the references for the secondary source are going to be your primary sources. So step 4, Once you've located your sources, then what's the next step? Then you should know what information you need to get from these primary sources. And you can do that by asking yourself several questions. How did this article fit into a broader view of the research area? How does it contribute to the research area? If there's something in the article that's ambiguous that you don't understand very well, if it's something disputable, if there's something that was not explained enough, or if it's unknown and why that happened, usually once you find these, you can ask yourself then which unknowns, which knowledge gaps can I fill in my research area? Why do you propose to fill them? So that would be your purpose or justification. And then you have to answer, how do you propose to do it? Which would be your methodology. So when you're reading these articles, you should keep these questions in mind. Sometimes we just start reading a paper and then we don't think about these things while we're reading, and then we have to go back and reread because we didn't get all the information that we needed from this article. So once you do that, step 5 would be to choose preliminary topic headings into which you can sort your sources. So the topic headings are going to depend on your area of expertise, and these are just examples. If this is not an exhaustive list, there can be more, but usually you can craft a review by location, if it's a country, if it's a region of the world. You can also do it by perspective, as the example we talked about, new drugs. So you can have negative and positive perspectives about an issue, and then you need to compare that and contrast and talk about it. You can do it by methodology. If you're using numerical methods, for example, different techniques that are being used in your research area. You can also do them considering current trends, or you can also use a chronological time to compare the sources that you're using. It's important to remember that the headings of the lead review should go from a broad area, from a broad topic, and then you must narrow it down so that the last topic on your research or in your literature review be the specific research question or objective or hypothesis that you're trying to answer. So step 6 would be to then sort this information into the subtopic headings. It's usually useful to arrange sources in what's called a synthesis matrix. So this matrix is going to help you summarize and document all the sources and how they relate to each other. And it's going to help you create this narrative, this research story, and it's going to make it better to read, and it's going to make it more appealing. You can create a folder to sort these articles, or if it makes it easier for you, you can make it a folder directory and then store them there. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm gonna share the Canvas course for a second. So is everyone looking at the Canvas course?
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is a synthesis matrix. It's an Excel file, but I prepared it for this workshop. And usually you have an article ID, so you can organize your sources and you can give them an identifier. Usually you can write the title, the abstract, the publication date. You can type in any contributions or your annotated bibliography if you made it. And then you can add any, you can, of course, add more columns, but you can have like missing information columns, so things that are in dispute that are not unknown, that are unknown. So that you would write it here. And then if you want to write other information. So once you do this and then you have all your articles here, then you have this like the other tab of the Excel file that you can have your topic headings. And then you can write what part of the article that fits into each one of these headers. So for example, if it's talking about modeling, and then this paper that I just showed you, it has something about time series in the methods section in page 2 of paragraph 4. So if you do this for all your articles, it's going to be easier for you to know which ones you can compare with each other. You can also search the Excel file and look for keywords if you want to remember information about the articles. So the Excel file is available on the Canvas course, so you can refer to it. I'm going to keep sharing the presentation. So once you do that, step 7 is to reread. And is everyone seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Thank you. So step 7 is going to be what? Read, reread, and read again. So because writing a literature review, it's more of an iterative process. So once you start taking your courses or you start reading more, then you're going to gain a new perspective and your knowledge is going to increase. So maybe you read a paper the first time and you didn't get it or you were confused, but after you read it again a couple of times and you gain more knowledge, then it might be easier to get useful information out of it. Keep good communication with your advisor if it's a thesis or dissertation. Why? Because you might have missed a subtopic and then your advisor is going to tell you to add it or might recommend some other sources that you can include in your review. So that's important. Step 8, then you write the review. And it is recommended that you do not start writing the review right away until you have assembled all your information. Why? Because a review that is written too early will probably need a lot of rewriting. If you organize your sources and then you need to add more, or you need to add another subtopic, then you're going to need to rewrite a lot of stuff. So it's better to just get your stuff together, get all the information, and then after that, then you can start writing. So once you start writing, you can revise the subheadings that you selected. You can merge them, you can combine them, you can eliminate subtopics that then at the end you find that are not necessary or appropriate. And then you need to write the text to link these ideas. Usually you do that with citation patterns, paraphrasing, and transitions. So these are the 8 steps. This is a recap. You can print this slide and keep it for reference. So how do we put it all together? And that's the most difficult part because we can all create these paragraphs, individual paragraphs of articles, but how do we put it together? And that's the critical part. So there are 2 types of citations. The integral citations, they're usually the name of the author is included in the sentence. It's a grammatical part of the sentence. It's mostly used in the arts. We also have non-integral citations. Then it's when we use parentheses or brackets to cite our sources. This citation is mostly used in the sciences and engineering, but my advice is that use them both. Use them both, you combine them, and then it's going to give your literature review like more appeal. It's going to make it easier and more interesting to read. With the integral citations, we have the quote citations where we use quotes to literally cite what someone else said, or you can just paraphrase, use your own words. In the non-integral citations, you can also paraphrase or summarize, but you can also generalize, and it's when we use, like, for example, here, numerous studies have reported an increase in fatalities. And then we combine 2 or 3 sources together. We make a general statement, and then we cite the sources that we're using. In terms of transition words, of course, they're super important because they help us connect ideas and they're going to show a logical relationship between them. And it's going to help us get the message across to the readers. So it's our job to make the reader's job easier and we do that by doing concise, coherent writing. So these transition words are important to make the research story more engaging. We have a resource in the Canvas course. It's from the University of Manchester. It's the Academic Phrase Bank webpage. Super useful. It gives you have a few examples here. So for example, it says, these results further support, or these results confirm or are consistent with. So it gives you like 10 or 20 different ways to say the same thing, but it helps you give more variety to your review. So I suggest you check them out. So I think we're good on time, so we're gonna talk about the activity. It's a short literature review from the University of West Florida. I didn't want to get a too complex topic because I wanted everyone to basically understand what we're doing here. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to share the Canvas course again. Okay, so it's about cyberbullying, and I chose it because it's simple. It's a simple writing, but it's something that we can all understand in terms of the content, basically. So this review starts with the abstract, and then the author goes on with an introduction, right? So chapter 2, he starts the literature review. And for instance, his first subtopic, his first topic is the prevalence of cyberbullying. So how common is it? And if you notice the parts that are highlighted, he's citing his sources, and he's talking about Canadian universities. And then back a bit lower, then it says 13 to 14-year-old students, so maybe middle school, high school. So we can see that he's comparing results from universities and schools. So he says, for example, that it's 24% of students were victims of cyberbullying, and then high school students, they're only 11%, victims of cyberbullying. If you notice, these studies are from 2014, right? So that's important that we talked about the current trends. So it's important to have that our sources are recent. And usually it's recommended that it's like at least 5 years old. It shouldn't be more than 5 years old. So for example, the part in blue, it's what we talked about when the author synthesizes or tries to explain his sources. So he says, this raises a question as to why it seems to be less prevalent, cyberbullying, less prevalent in younger students, right? He says that one possible way would be that younger students do not have access to technology as college students do, but this was back in 2014, right? So now 2021, like every kid has a cell phone. So this might have changed. So it's important to make that sure that your sources are current, and make sure that you are able to synthesize and explain what your sources are telling us. We keep going, and then this other subheading is he's talking about the types of people who are bullies, the type of people who are victims. Okay, so you can look at it from different perspectives, and we talked about the subheadings of the perspectives, if from the side of the victim or from the side of the aggressor. And he talks about gender, for instance, and he also talks about demographics. Okay, so you can, if you wanted to, you could study the prevalence of cyberbullying considering gender, like women, men, or you can consider demographics, if it's a minority, if it's African Americans, if it's Latin people. So you can approach this in different ways. Again, the blue sentence is he explaining what he's read. So he says that even though it's cyberbullying, but it's the traditional way that people transfer, that the way that people are aggressors transfer to the cyber world. So if you're an aggressor in your life, then you might be an aggressor on the internet too. So it says this leads to the questions on how the relationship of the victim and the aggressor, how does that happen? And then if you notice, then this pink section is his transition to the next topic in the review. So he's saying, how is that connection? How is that relationship between aggressor and victim? And then he starts talking about the relationship between them. So he's using a clever transition between sections in the review. Then he starts talking about, he also talks about cyberbullying and traditional bullying. And this could be another subtopic, and it could be one of the current trends, right? Usually like back before when schools were open and everything, then you could see more traditional bullying where people were face to face with their aggressors. But now, because of COVID, then you could see a rise on cyberbullying. Again, the blue ones is he's trying to synthesize the information that he's just discussed. And again, this part, section 2.2, the effects of cyberbullying. And then this is a really good transition. He says the first part of the review focused on demographics, but now we're going to shift our focus and we're going to talk about the effects of cyberbullying. Okay, so these are the kind of things that I want you to think about, like how do you close one paragraph or one section of your review and how you start the next one. Of course, you don't need to do this on the first draft. This is something that's caught while you're editing, but it's important to consider that how do you change the reader's focus from the sources that you're synthesizing to your view on the subject, and how does it transitions and links to additional sections of your review. I guess that's pretty much what I'm going to show you here. I'm going to switch back to the presentation. So these are my references, and if there's any questions.
Thank you, Luisa. That was great. I find, even though you're talking about literature review, you go off into so many topics that then naturally evolves into in writing style and how to create a report or different types of papers. I did just have a question, and I don't know what you might use, Luisa. I myself am just used to using APA and MLA citation guides. I didn't know if there were particular ones that you use, if you jump around, if there's a more common one these days, or what?
Yeah, it basically depends on your area of study. So APA is mostly used for sciences. MLA, I guess it's for English, for arts. Engineers use the EEE or the Chicago Caribbean type of manual of style.
Okay, thank you.
Luisa, I just wanted to mention, great job, by the way. That was really, I have to say, I wish I had had this talk given to me when I was a graduate student, because I think no one ever actually teaches us how to do literature review. They just say, go do a literature review. And you're like, okay. And you kind of learn from reading other people. So thank you so much. I wish I could take this back in time. But anyway.
Thank you.
But one thing I was going to say is that I just did a literature review on online teaching, some aspects of online teaching. And I think your point about checking for dates and how old the citations are is really important in a lot of topic areas, because I wrote this in the chat. I was finding a lot of stuff that was even 5 or 7 years old. It was just a very different world in terms of technology and stuff. So there are a lot of topics that just move so quickly that you kind of have to look for more recent stuff. It doesn't mean you can't cite the older material if it's relevant, but I thought that was a really good point that you made about that. I just wanted to emphasize that again. So thank you. It was awesome though.
I have a quick comment.
Sure.
This is Alana. I was listening to you. Thank you. It was a good talk. Interesting to hear your perspective on how this is done. And I just wanted to make one comment. I heard you say sort of early on that people should consider like the source of the citation, of course, like for example, how many times something has been cited, or looking at the funders is really important, for example, and the date and all that kind of stuff. One thing I would say though, I would caution people to not be dissuaded from using a source if it only has a couple of citations.
Sure.
And the reason I say that is because, for example, in my field, I'm in placental toxicology. It's an extremely small, there really aren't very many labs that are doing it. And none of our papers get that many citations. But the literature that is out there, I should expect, based on what I'm doing, that they're not going to be like papers that are in Nature, for example. So, I would almost argue too that it's a literature review is actually a good place to put less cited things in some cases, because you can almost, as a commentary on them, you can sometimes argue the merits of something, or talk about in a lot of our cases with our work, we see like really inconsistent, you know, one study says this is toxic, another says this is not toxic. So, I mean, I would just caution people to not necessarily be put off by something that doesn't have that many citations or doesn't have that many sightings or is a little bit more obscure, because there might be some good reasons for that.
Yeah, that's great, Alana. And I wanted to point out that sometimes in medicine, you get these papers that are one case studies. So it's just one person, one patient that had this adverse effect
Yeah.
on a drug or any procedure. So it's important that it's out there because people can understand how the prevalence of some of this stuff. I also recommend, like, for example, you have to know, and of course, we're all in different fields. So as you said, you can be in a field that's so specific that there's not much out there, or if you're in a new topic that there is nothing out there. So if
exactly.
you're doing new technology, then you're not going to find the sources, and you have to be able to explain that there's not much out there. I usually recommend just get to know the one true, like the biggest scientist in your field, and try to find those sources. For example, I'm working on spring catchment basins. So I was even looking for these keywords and I couldn't find anything. Because I was looking for the wrong keywords. So, and then I found them, and it's this doctor called Bonacci. So he has like 30 papers on this. So it's important that you find your niche, who is the biggest contributor to published works in your area, and then start from there. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Luisa, could I ask one more question? I heard you mention a couple of sources where you had gone to kind of begin your searches or do your searches. I happen to see our library now as it's not a library anymore. It's like a digital integration place. So I wondered if you could comment just on library databases. Do you use those a lot? Do you go just straight to your library database, and I'm sure UPR as well as Michigan and other schools have these sort of comprehensive databases. Is that something you've also used a lot? Is the library's database to search?
At least for me, the databases that we have for UPRM are not that, it's not that big. I mean, we have good sources, and I try to find online. And then when I find something that I might need, then I go to the library to see if they have it there. So I mostly use Google Scholar, and then find the papers that I need and then go there. Or if I need to contact a librarian to get like a loan from another school or something, then.
I see. Yeah, so I'll just mention that, and I'm sorry that the system there is not as robust as you would like it, but I would say that definitely at Northeastern, and I can imagine that at Michigan as well, and probably the other schools if there's folks from other places, that the libraries tend to buy subscriptions to massive amounts of journals, and in most cases have a lot of access rights to those, either embedded in the library or you get sent over to the system where you can access it with single sign-on, which is really awesome.
At Michigan, and I use it all the time. Like where we can go through, if we go through a PubMed portal on from the library's website, you can click something called MGet-It, and it gets you just about anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do have a good system at Michigan as well.
Thank you for that opening, Luisa. And Luisa,
Thank you, everyone.
a couple of references to the Canvas site that these guys have created as well, that this committee has created. So let me first of all stop the recording.